at the beginning of my monastic life, what challenges did I have? Well, I think the main challenge was just the practice. You do the practice and your mind goes into distraction time after time, and you just have to keep going, pulling it back all the time. That's what I'd say the main thing. As far as the external things are concerned, there was a lot of contention to begin with. We were in Wat Patnam, and things were a bit turbulent at that time. But we moved from there, moved to Wat Tatong, and later on we returned to England, and I was 6 years in England. That was a bit of a challenge, because the others all gave up the robe, and I was holding the baby. And the baby was the English Sangha Trust, which but the thing was, I knew perfectly well at that time that I'd have to find a teacher who I could rely upon. And unfortunately I met a Thai person who was coming back to Thailand, and he had a job of going up to the Mekong area and searching for minerals, because he was in the mining department, or they call it now the I can't remember. Anyway, it means the sort of geological department. And when he went out to any place, he'd stay in the nearby Wat and spend the night there, and he'd ask people about the Ajahns in the area, and he very soon got onto the Ajahns who came from Thanachan Mun. And when I came to Thailand, he said, "Oh, there are many Ajahns there whom you could go to." And one day he came to me and he said, "Oh, there's a well-known Ajahn in Wat Boorn." And I went there. It was Thanachan Mahabor, and I liked him, and I liked the way he behaved and talked. And I asked him if I could come up, go up to his Wat, and he agreed. So I went, and I've more or less been there since.
Some of the challenges that some people have, say, with passion for women or food or these kind of things, do they trouble you very much in the beginning?
No, not really. Oh, I mean, I won't say they weren't there. They were, but they weren't a big trouble. No, I was fortunate. My karma must have been fairly good in that way.
Did you suffer from much anger as a young monk?
Anger? No, not a lot really. No.
Delusion?
Delusion, yes. Delusion, yes. A lot of distraction, distracted thought. It lasted a long time too. Distraction is one of the main problems people have, because the mind tends to go into distraction automatically. And I once questioned, what was the purpose of it? I mean, practical purpose in life. And it seems that it's quite likely to be a method of refreshing memory. At least that's one of the things it does. I'm not saying there aren't others, but it's a refreshment of memories, as the rethinking of them.
My teacher in Switzerland in the Dhammapala monastery told me also from this. There's a typical constellation when you are ordained. Often the person where you have the most problems in the monastery sitting next to you, and you are bonded your whole monastic life with this person. And my teacher told me, and other monks, and I have also experience about this. Can you say something about this typical situation? Is this karma, or what is it? Because you have a person next to you, maybe you hold your whole monastic life, and the other person, no problem, but there's something difficult in the relationship.
Is there something physical in a relationship like that between two people in a monastic life? Oh, I don't know. It's more likely to be of a psychic nature, if anything. And one can have a relationship with people there. In fact, karma can be very strange. It can put one into a situation where you almost recognize the people that you're with. Sometimes in a good way, sometimes in a bad way. But one almost recognizes them, and one probably drops into a mode of relationship which one's had in the past. Maybe with that person. This is something the way karma works. It pitches one into a situation which one's already created for oneself in the past. Karma, in fact, is something very important. Karma means action. Action done by body, speech or mind. And karma, when it's done like that, has a result. The result comes up in due course when the conditions are right for it. When the conditions are right means to say that the conditions, just by chance, happen to be in a suitable mode for that karma to give its result. And this brings one to the point of, can one control one's karma? And the answer is, you can partially control it. Because, for instance, if you deliberately put yourself into a dangerous situation, you're chancing your karma. There may be karma there that you're going to have an accident in that situation. Because of that, the Buddha and the Acharyas all say one should avoid dangers that you don't have to go into. If there's something that's dangerous, and you know it's dangerous, and you deliberately put yourself in that situation, that may be giving a chance for some karma to arise. It doesn't matter if it's good karma. If it's bad karma, one must watch out. But really speaking, we can say we create ourselves. Karma means that what we do, we become. And we become that because we've done it. And we create our own future, therefore. And if we want the future to be good, we've got to look very carefully at what karma we make. And be very cautious. And this is where mindfulness comes in. The awareness of what is right and what's wrong. What's good and what's bad. If one practices in the right way and does the right things, one can develop the future being pretty good for one. But if one goes the other way, it can be very bad. Karma is very important. When there's karma, there must be rebirth, or we call it rebirth, but it's really birth dependent on the conditions that preceded it. And when there is birth again, we pitch ourselves into a situation which comes from something we've known in the past, which means our karma, one's own karma. If one's karma is good, it can be a good birth. If it's bad, it can be quite bad. And it's worthwhile taking a look at the world and thinking, if you were born again, where would be a good place to be born? And you'll find there are not many places. The world's a pretty rough place now. So the story of that is that one should try and get free beforehand, or get to such a state where one's got more certainty. And if one wants something to stir one's practice up, to give one good reason why one should practice hard, one should think of karma and its results, and the way of rebirth. It's very important.
When you say to avoid dangerous situations, isn't the forest life that we lead kind of oriented towards turning and facing our fears and sometimes moving into places that aren't necessarily life-threatening but that are physically difficult and even are on the edge of danger, especially if one is heedless?
Oh, as for which one? I have his say. Enough. Okay. Enough. You ask, is it reasonable that we should get into dangerous and difficult positions in the forest and so on when one's practicing? The thing is, it's not so much a question of getting to danger or not into danger. Sometimes we have to. I mean, every time we step into a car and go somewhere, we don't know that we're going to get out of that car in one piece. There's always danger there. But the thing is, if it's necessary to go from here to there, well, you have to take the chance. That's all. The thing is, though, is it good to go just joyriding in a car for no special purpose? This sort of thing is one should look at and see. And if you're going to the hills and so on, to go to the hills and live in the hills for the purpose of practice is quite a reasonable thing to do. And sure, there are dangers there. But there's a type of dangers where one can expect to survive. And even though they're hard, it won't do one much harm, fundamentally. You do hear of accidents and things happening, but mostly it's all right. So if you start trying to scale cliffs and go do things like that, then that's maybe putting yourself into danger that's unnecessary. And one should watch out for that. The Buddha always said one must be careful, and that this life is valuable. No questions.
Speaking of karma, could you say something about the relative importance of karma of mind, of speech, and physical action? For instance, if there's some anger kilesa that comes up and I restrain speech and action, but still the mind is spewing thoughts of anger, and I haven't found an antidote.
Yeah. The question of whether the relative values of actions done by body, speech or mind. It's always said that the most gross actions, which are the bodily actions, bring the most gross karma, the hardest karma. Speech is midway. The mind is the most subtle. So the karma comes up in different ways, depending on the way it's made. If one has a tendency to anger, and one recognizes the anger coming up, and one gives way to thought, that thought is karma, the thinking, and there's tanha behind it. The tanha is the wanting to get rid of the unpleasant feeling of anger coming up. And the wanting to do it is in terms of blaming something or other, criticizing something or other. And when one does that, that criticism is karma, which will come back on one in terms of thought. It can be mental karma. The tanha that is made creates a situation of attachment. So that the attachment there is the attachment to that situation which came up. That attachment being there, the karma can arise again. When the trigger goes for that sort of situation to occur again, maybe you see the guy somewhere on the street and suddenly it all comes up. Then you've got the same problem coming again, and the tendency to make more karma there. To effectively get rid of something of that sort, one must get rid of not only in speech and action, but in mind as well. The mind's very important. And probably the best way to do it is to realize that the mental state that's coming up is a danger to oneself. If you look at it as being something dangerous, and if you have the mindfulness to catch it and to turn and look at the cause of it, which is that feeling, then you should be able to catch it and hold it. But one must be aware, because when you do catch it and you hold it, you think, oh, all right, I've done pretty well now. And then in a short while, bang, it comes up again. It tries to catch you unawares. So you've got to keep at it until it really does disappear. It's one of the primary methods of training that one should try and develop.
The natural response is to suppress it, push it away. So you're not really letting it go, you're just kind of like pushing it away. And that's just naturally what happens. What advice would you give to get out of that rut of suppressing?
You mean, I'm not quite sure if I got the question, but is it that, in effect, the tendency of repressing the anger is something that doesn't get rid of it?
Yeah, it's just kind of, you just instead of
if one is tending towards anger and one allows the anger to come up as a thought, the thought there is still kamma. If you repress it totally, that is physically, verbally and mentally, then there's nothing there to come up. Nothing left. And the thing it must die away. It doesn't mean to say that the situation won't be remembered later and bring it all up again. That may happen. But all this means is that one's got to deal with it each time it comes up. Each time you deal with it, it gets weaker. But repressing the speech and thought, and not speech and action, but not suppressing thought, can cause quite a lot of trouble. I mean, you get it with people who smoke cigarettes and they want to give up. So they decide to give up and they throw away the package and then they stop smoking. But they haven't really stopped, because the mind's going wanting a cigarette all the time. It's sort of looking round for cigarettes and thinking of them, and it's bound to this thing. If it's bound like that, the person hasn't really given up. All the conditions are there for them to start again. But if they've given up the thoughts, if they turn away from that thought every time it arises, then it'll die away properly.
Can you speak about the importance of mindfulness and its purpose in the practice to enlighten?
The importance of mindfulness and its importance. Really speaking, mindfulness is what gives one data to do the practice. Because for you to be aware of anything, to know something, you have to have your mind on that thing. If you're doing something and your mind's on something else, then it's really only an automatic action that's going on, and one can't learn from it. Also, if the automatic action's going on, sometimes the action might be harmful. Something might happen that's wrong, and one's not prepared for it. And one doesn't know how to act, or one acts wrongly. This is one of the things that happens with mindfulness. If you don't have mindfulness, the other thing is that to learn in Dhamma and to learn by experience, one must have mindfulness to point it out. Otherwise, you've got only memory, and memory can get mostly distorted. It's quite distorted, really. But if you have mindfulness, the mindfulness will fix it quite well, and one want to learn from it. It's like if you're walking in a place and you don't have mindfulness, you can trip or slip up very easily and get trouble. Whereas if you're mindful, you're watching. Your mind's on the present. It's in the present and it's watching what's happening. So you don't get the same tendency to trip up or to have trouble. Really, mindfulness is one of the most important teachings. Ajahn Mahabua said several times that the three things he teaches are mindfulness, wisdom, and effort. Those three. He said if you really practice those three, it's enough. Really, if you don't have the mindfulness, the wisdom has got very little to work on. If there's mindfulness there, the wisdom can pick up that things from that mindfulness, and it can pick up what's happening all the time. Yeah. Okay.
Taught three things: mindfulness, wisdom, and effort.
Yeah.
Could you say something about finding balance and effort? How effort might at times be either too great or too little?
I haven't quite got that.
Could you speak to the idea of effort and how one finds a balance in one's effort in practice?
Okay. This is how you get the effort to balance in your practice. How much effort you should put and so on. It depends very much on how the kilesas are working. If the kilesas are coming up strongly, then you have to use a lot of effort to overcome those kilesas. But if the kilesas are weak, you don't have to use much effort to overcome them. So it really depends upon the kilesas. It's like an enemy that's attacking you. If they're attacking you in force, you have to repel them in force. If they're just doing a weak attack, it's quite easy to repel them weakly like that. You don't want to bring the whole army out to deal with them. So the tendency, the way is that it will depend very much on the kilesas, how much effort one should use. If the kilesas are strong, you really have to get down to it and work hard. This is suggested in the sutta in Majjhima Nikaya, where the Buddha said how you should practice if the kilesas come up, cause you trouble. I can't remember all the details, but first you have to try and remember about the Buddha and what the Buddha did. Then if that doesn't work, you have to try and see what will be the result if you don't do this practice. Where will you go? You might go to the hell regions or go somewhere bad. It goes through a whole lot of things like that until finally it says, if all else fails, you've got to put your tongue on the roof of your mouth and grit your teeth and by force deal with the kilesas. In other words, the attack has to be developed to be defended equally by however strong it is. However strong an attack it is, you've got to have an equal defense.
For developing mindfulness, is it helpful if one puts oneself in unfamiliar and alien situations? Something like put on ropes and then doing something that one has never done before. Is this helping with mindfulness?
Yeah. Now, here the question: should you put yourself in unfamiliar situations to help mindfulness? The best thing is try it. Tanachan Kao used to do just that. He would go and sit in practice at night. He'd go sit in practice in one place in the forest or the hills, and he'd only spend some time there until he was beginning to get familiar with the place. then he'd get up and go to another place. This was all at night. And he'd go to another place and sit down there and do the practice. And after some time there, he'd go to another place. He'd go several places in the area where he was staying. And he'd just go from one to the other, like that. Because he said, when he started getting familiar with the place, he started sort of losing the strength of mindfulness. The mindfulness, he was getting familiar with it, and because he was getting familiar with it, he felt he could let go and relax. So in order to stop that, he would get up and go to somewhere else. This was his practice, but for each one's got to find one's own way and what suits one. If that suits you, I'd say do it. But it's quite interesting how many of the Ajahns would go out at night in the forest or in the hills without a light. They walk chankram without a light. But I'm not suggesting that people should try that until they've developed enough samadhi.
Would they have been developed to the point where they could see, like how the Buddha says, one trains until one sees night as day and day as night? Or or was it they went off in the dark to just see what the mind would conjure up?
To see what one's doing in the dark, in the darkness there. Some people may have this capacity. Some people may have a complete confidence. And if they've got a reason for confidence, that doesn't matter, it's all right. The thing is, a person shouldn't do this until they really have that confidence, until they know. Because it's not only the animals and the sort of snakes and things, but also you can trip up on rocks and you might fall somewhere. But a lot of the people who go out to do that sort of thing, they say, if you have a torch, you can't see anything, because you can only see where the torch is. Whereas if you don't have the torch, your eyes adapt to quite a large degree, and you can see a lot of things. You can see the general line of what's there. Whether you can see a snake is another matter, I don't know. Yeah. You can't hear.
He said working with. What do you mean by working with your kilesas?
Working. No, it's working against the kilesas. Many people do work with their kilesas, but you shouldn't. Because working with the kilesas is really aiding them, pushing them on and helping them. But it's work that one should do with the kilesas, in the sense that you've got to get onto them, get at them, try and fight them.
How active actively should one fight kilesas?
Oh, it depends on the kilesas, very much. If they're strong, it must be strong. Must be very, very strong with them. If they're not strong, then it doesn't matter so much.
Therefore, can you give an example in your own practice of kilesa that was really strong and what you did to combat it?
Yeah, some of it is unsuitable to talk about. But mostly it's a matter of, for instance, with distraction, you've got to pull it back to the task of keeping the mind on the parikamma, for example, on the buddha or anapanasati. The task of keeping it there, and one has to pull it back to that task every time it goes away. And you've got to keep on really until the kilesas give way. What generally happens is by practicing like that, if one keeps on going against them, they get weak. The thing is, the kilesas won't stand up to persistence. If one persists in anything, one can get through. But one has to persist, one has to go on with it until one succeeds. It's all like what Napoleon said. He said other people are quite as clever as he was. But he said that he just persisted when other people gave way. How to
develop right samadhi?
How to develop right samadhi. Right samadhi has got really two meanings here. One is samadhi having a right purpose and object. In other words, the purpose you're doing it is a right purpose. It's for the developing of Dhamma. And the object you use, it can be just something like the breathing, anapana, or buddha, parikamma, or it can be investigating the body, or something of that sort. Doing this sort of practice, the samadhi is right, because it's right the right thing to do in the way of Dhamma. But further than that, there's the right samadhi of the path, and that's a different thing, because that comes up only when all the other path factors are right. When the path factors, or the Eightfold Path factors, all of them are right, then the samadhi, if that's right, then that can become a path moment, which means to say one breaks through. And in a way of speaking, one gets to nibbana temporarily. And if it's the first three path moments, it drops away again. But the path, the Eightfold Path, isn't just the training of doing these things on the Eightfold Path. That certainly is necessary. But it doesn't turn into the Eightfold Path just by practicing those things. It's got to be that all these things come together and coalesce in a state that is absolutely right and correct. When that happens, then the jump can take place. It's like a bridge leading it over to the other side.
explain the Pañña and give examples of how one could put it into practice?
How?
Pañña. Could you explain what it means and how could one put it into practice?
I can't hear clearly.
He asked if you could explain the meaning of moderation in eating. He gave a term for that.
Oh, moderation in eating.
And ways one could develop.
I see. Can I explain what moderation in eating means? Well, generally speaking, it starts off with taking that amount of food that doesn't make you fat. That's a simple way of putting it. But moderation also means that you don't look for the choice bits, the best bits, but you take the food just as it is, like that. Moderation in eating means that you try and eat those things which help the practice. The Indians had a way of putting it. They said that there's the three modes of food: tamas, rajas, and sattva. The tamas food makes you heavy and thick, sort of. It's heavy food, like sort of potatoes and things of that sort. The rajas food, the moderate type, makes you hot, and it can increase sensuality. The tamas food makes you light and buoyant, and it doesn't require a lot of digestion. The general thing is that one will need probably a bit of all three, but to see that you don't take too much of the first two types of food, because they can have a big effect on the practice. They can dull one's mind, because when you eat food, blood has to go to the stomach for digestion, and if the blood goes to the stomach, it doesn't go to the head, to the brain. Because of that, one feels sleepy, and it's not easy to keep the mindfulness as well. But on the other hand, if you eat the sattvic food, the light food, all the time, you might get malnutrition. So you've got to be a bit cautious there.
Which category does sticky rice fall into?
It's got quite a lot of tamas, I'd say. The dulling factor, heavy, but not entirely. It's sort of heavy food, but its result isn't particularly heavy.
I would like to ask, what do you recommend to do when in meditation the nimitta arises?
Generally, what do you do when a nimitta arises? Or Buddha practice, you look on the nimitta as a distraction. You don't have anything to do with it. Don't try and get rid of it. Don't try and persist and make it persist. Just lose interest in it. Because the nimitta comes up much in the same way as a memory of something. The memory comes up and one grasps at it, and the mind goes. You've gone away from the practice, and it's a distraction. If the nimitta comes up, that's a distraction too. So in that case, you don't want to be bothered about nimittas when you're doing the practice of, say, anapana and that sort of thing. But there are other times when you can get a nimitta arising from the practice, which can help a great deal. I mean, if you get a nimitta arising of, say, yourself lying down dead in front of you, like that. This is quite a common nimitta that people get. And if you can then bring that to your mind often, it can prevent the kilesas grabbing hold of you. It can be quite important, that. Or if it suits you and you get an asubha nimitta. Asubha is something like body gradually rotting away, something of that sort. That can be helpful too. But one must be careful and know that the nimitta is the right type for one's own character. I mean, if an angry person gets an asubha nimitta, it's quite likely that it may increase his anger. And you've got to be a bit watchful there.
Can you recommend how to not pay attention towards the meditation? Say the fact of the person is pretty sensual and it's so good, it's pretty hard not to look at it, not to pay attention to it.
How should you not pay attention to the nimitta? It's like this. If you're vijnana, this consciousness, is the one that knows this. If vijnana is concentrating on the nimitta, then you can't get rid of it, of course, because it's a centre of concentration. But if your concentration, volitionally, you make the concentration go back to the breathing, and you keep it by force, you keep it on the breathing, then the nimitta will disappear. Because if the vijnana turns from that and goes to the breathing, the nimitta just doesn't have any power at all. It's like, supposing you're driving a car, and you're talking to a person in the car, and you come to a busy intersection where cars are going all over the place, and the person's still talking, but you don't know what they're saying. Your mind has turned from that person to what's in front of you and in the driving. And you can see there, in a case like that, how if you turn the mind from one thing to another, that other thing just disappears. It's just not there, as far as one's concerned. And the same thing you can do with nimittas. If you turn away from the nimitta to something else, the nimitta hasn't got any power to hold on.
If the nimitta takes the form of a brightness of mind, inner brightness, arises from peace of mind, is that something which should be focused on or turned away from?
The brightness of mind is a bit like a speedometer, and that the brightness of mind is an indicator of the state of mind. But the brightness isn't something to focus on or to worry about at all, think about much. It's just giving an indication of the state of mind. It's something that attracts a person, and because it attracts a person, it can also distract them from the practice. And the best thing to do is to go on with the practice, regardless of the brightness. That will probably make it brighter. But Ajahn always said that this brightness, he said he had this at the last moment before he attained. But in this brightness, he said there was a sort of focal point. And he sort of questioned what that focal point was. And he said it came up within him that focal point was the essential thing for rebirth, to be born again. But it didn't sort of click with him at the time. And it's only later on he started thinking about that, and he realized, oh, I see what that is now. He saw what it was. After that, he chucked out all the brightness and the focal point. He just gave it away, gave it up straight away. And it's then that he attained. In other words, that was stopping him, that brightness. And he said that brightness, after he attained, he said he realized that brightness was like, as he describes it, buffalo shit. As compared with the present state that he had.
When the breath disappears, where to pay attention?
When the breath disappears, if you're doing the practice on breathing and the breath becomes very, very fine until you can't find it, then you must keep on that point. We've been watching the breath. But when you watch the breath, you have to watch it at a point. You must find out a point where it's felt most strongly. And so you keep on that point, and as it goes finer and finer and finer, you must keep that point. Is the main thing to hold the attention. And when the breath disappears, if you keep on that point, it'll come back again. But if the breathing stops entirely, because it's gone so calm that there's no breath left, then don't panic. It'll come back again, all right. A lot of people, they panic then, they think, oh, I'm not breathing. Oh, I must get back and breathe. And then they break it all up. And the cessation of breath there is quite valuable. It's not something to break up.
I've heard there's, I think Ajahn Mahabua said that if someone is of an anxious disposition, they should not pick a point as focus for the breath above the Adam's apple or the throat. Have you heard of that?
No, I haven't heard that. But I've heard Tanashan Lee, who was a Sokaran, he said that if you get headaches when you when you focus the breathing on somewhere around the tip of the nose, then you should not go above the throat. You should go lower down for the breathing. But I haven't heard anything about if there's anxiety. And if there's anxiety there, probably it'll be difficult to concentrate anyway, I think. Anxiety tends to bring up a state of tension. And the first thing a person's got to do is to learn to overcome that tension. Some people are like that. They have a lot of tension, a lot of anxiety.
Do you have any recommendations as to how to overcome anxiety?
Huh?
Do you have any recommendations as to how to overcome anxiety?
Yes, it's like, as I said before, the breathing. You can do it by taking a breath in and pushing it down deep, right down low in the stomach. and then letting it come out very slowly, like that. Do this no more than 3 times. If you do too much, it's bad for you. But if you do it just once or twice, it's all right. And it can help quite a lot now, because the breath and the mind are very close. And if you overcome the anxiety in breathing, in the way of breathing, then it will also help to overcome it in the mind. They affect each other.
When Mahaprabhu is talking about practice of the jitter,
Mm.
can you talk a bit about
The brightness of the jitter there means that you get the perception of light, and you can have it whether your eyes are open or closed. Everything seems bright. It can be visible light. It can become very strong too. But it's really more an indication of the state of the jitter. If the state's good, you tend to get light coming up. But not everybody does. Some people, their tendency is towards wisdom, and the wisdom blocks it, prevents the light coming. The reason seems to be that if a person gets light coming up, or tends to, then the wisdom jumps on it, says, "What's this?" And that stops it. But one shouldn't go searching for light. If it comes of itself, okay. If it doesn't matter. It's not a major thing that matters. It's a good indicator, though, that the mind's concentrated. Can you go? Okay, thanks.
Can one spontaneously enter meditative absorption as a result of either previous karma or some other condition?
Can you obtain meditative absorption from karma or other conditions? Well, certainly you can attain it from karma, and I'd say from other conditions as well. But the thing is that the conditions have to be the right ones. And if one's practiced it in the past, it can come up from that. And a person can get quite a boost in the practice from past karma, what they've done in the past. But the modes of practice that one does, if they're the modes of practice, one can get meditative absorption from that. Absorption just means samadhi, really. One can get samadhi from it. That's the way of the practice. And the aim is really to get that absorption. Because when you've got that absorption, the mind is calm. When it's calm, it's happy. When it's happy, the kilesas are not bothering it.
Many people wish to have samadhi, but have difficulty being mindful in daily life. and the mind proliferating, what advice do you have?
Yeah. What advice do I have for the mind proliferating when people want to gain samadhi? Okay. Well, the only thing is really to question why is it difficult? And you've got to search. And it's a general sort of axiom in Buddhism that all conditions arise depending on the surrounding circumstances. So you've got to look in the surrounding circumstances to find out what conditions are stopping it. Now, circumstances can be many. They can be, for example, food, weather, one's own actions, what one's done, speaking too much or too little or whatever it is. They can be internal bodily conditions. They can be the people you've met with. Endless ones like that. And one must search out and see if one can find what's the key to this. Where's the key problem? The conditions can go even into the past karma. Also, food is important. Many things are important there. And if any of these is wrong, then the conditions are not right for the samadhi to come up. So one has to look at those conditions and get to realize where one's faults are, where one is at fault in samadhi. Quite often it's just too much thinking. If there's too much thinking, the mind will be whirling around all the time. And we've got to learn how to stop that. In fact, we can say that the developing of samadhi means the stopping of thought. It doesn't mean you stop it all the time, of course. But when you're doing the samadhi, you stop it. In other words, one learns how to control thought.
Do you have some remedy for fault-finding mind?
For?
Fault-finding mind?
Fault-finding mind.
Fault-finding mind, oh, yes. If one finds faults and criticizes much, that means it's a dosa root. It's the root of anger coming up. And then that person must learn that fault-finding, criticizing, anything of that sort is completely wrong. It's the opposite of what they should be doing. They should take no interest in whether things are right or wrong, good or bad. That's for people who are dealing with those things. But to take interest and find fault all the time, and have a tendency like that's quite harmful. It's not a good thing to have at all. This doesn't mean, of course, that if it's your job to search for faults in things, it doesn't mean to say you shouldn't find fault in that sense. I mean, if you have, say, an inspection job and you have to find whether things are right or wrong, if you find fault, then it may be very important to correct it. But if it's a sort of a mental habit of fault finding, then that's bad. It's not a good thing at all. One should try and overcome that. The way to overcome it is to put in mind the idea that that, whatever it is none of my business. It's up to them. If they do it wrong, so they do it wrong. And that's all.
Do you have any recommendations for a good diet? What sorts of food to eat?
Well, I'm not a dietitian really, but what foods to eat for a good diet, I think that depends on the person. Some people find one diet suits them very well, other people another diet. It depends. Can't really give any fixed thing on this. The only thing I have seen is that people with diabetes should have a vegetarian diet and not take meats. But if the person hasn't got diabetes, well, obviously it's not so important. That I don't know. I think you have to go to books for this. And every book you go to will probably tell you something different. But I mean, there are quite a few nuts as well in this. I mean, you get people writing about diet and have some crazy ideas. Some of them do, really. But they're not all crazy though.
Have you found that certain foods for you are not good to eat for good meditation?
Within limits, yes, but I find it's not the major factor. I mean, too much foods which are heavy foods, I find that tends to be not helpful. Foods which tend to make you a bit sleepy, not very good. I know the two things I don't like are prick and garlic.
In your practice, have you found that to change your parikrama in your meditation when you are sitting and when you are walking, was it helpful for you or not? Because some people recommend to do something else when you are doing walking meditation, and other people say no. So how is it with you?
If your main practice is with the parikrama, the best thing is keep it going if you can. But if you find that the rhythm of the parikrama and the rhythm of walking interfere, then you may have to change and do something different. For instance, you can examine the way you walk. Examine the movements of walking. But generally it's best to keep on the one parikrama until it really brings good results.
In your practice, do you find great value in staying in one place, or is it different for the individual?
Staying in one place.
Like staying in one monastery or one community for
I think this varies amongst people. For myself, it's better to stay in one place, I reckon. But for many people, for some people, they have to be moving. It's like, in a sort of small way, that what I was talking about Ajahn Kao, and how he went from place to place when he was doing his practice. And this has some value, definitely, because when you go to a new place, you have to think. When you're in the one place for a long time, a lot of things become automatic. One's learned exactly where everything is and exactly what to do and so on, and one doesn't have to think specially. But when you go somewhere else, you have to think. And for some people that's good, for some it's not so good, because if you have to think about things and it just gets you into a bit of a whirl in the mind, then it doesn't do much good. But if it breaks up the tendency to be habitual without thinking, then it's probably some good.
Some people seem to find their spiritual teacher in this life, like you've spent many years with
Yeah.
Some people seem to still be searching and have many spiritual mentors, but no one teacher. Do you have any theory on why this is?
Some people have many teachers. Do I have anything to say? It can be that a person must search and find the right teacher for himself. And this is true. It can happen like this. But also it can be that the person is avoiding putting himself under another teacher because he doesn't want to be controlled. So it depends on the motive of the person. I know in the West there's quite a lot of people like that. They go from one teacher to another, and they can never find any teacher that really satisfies them. And it may be because once the teacher starts telling them what they should really do, up come their kilesas. And says, oh, this teacher's no good. I think there's the saying of one Zen master. He said, when you find a good teacher, hang up your sandals and stay there. There's another story from the Zen tradition, how a man went to a teacher and the teacher asked him, he said, when you came in here you would have had a stick, because they use a stick on there. He said, which side of the door did you put it? And he couldn't remember. And he realized the teacher had caught him and being unmindful. So he realized that was a good teacher for him. He stayed there.
in the last Kubatu you said that you had been reading some Theokalia, some stuff from Orthodox Church.
Oh yeah.
Was it inspiring for you? Did you find something valuable for you there?
Yeah, there are valuable things in it. They're valuable in the qualities of the people who are doing it. Some of them had very good qualities. One monk, he in Russia, he went to a place in the forest, and he stayed there for some time. And after a time, people found him there, and they found he was a good teacher, and they wanted to come. Before long, they came starting to build a monastery there, where he was. That was the time he realized time to go, so he went off to another place. And then the same thing happened again, so he went go off to another place. in other words, he was the world was trying to catch him all the time, but he refused to be caught by it. It's like the simile of the log the Buddha gave. He saw a log of wood floating down the Ganges. He said to his followers, he said, that log will reach the ocean, provided it doesn't get snagged up by other sort of weeds and other things in the water, provided it doesn't sort of get caught on a sandbank, provided it doesn't go rotten and sink, and provided it's not taken by gods or men for use. If all this is the case, then in the end it'll float out into the ocean. And the simile is, of course, how if the monk doesn't give way to all these things, all the ways of the world, then he'll eventually float out to Nibbana. But this monk, he wasn't Buddhist, of course, but his practice and his way of doing it was good. Those sort of things are quite interesting, really, because in Christianity they had many people who were very, very enthusiastic, very zealous, but they had a lousy doctrine.
Is it possible that religious seekers, Christianity or Hindu, attain enlightenment?
Well, Christianity, I don't think it's possible unless they've got the Kamma from their past in Buddhism. Hinduism is another matter, because Hinduism covers so much. They reckon that Buddhism is an unorthodox Hindu system. It just sort of covers anything. They can consider it as Hinduism. But in Hinduism there are systems which are very, very good, and if someone who practices them might reach enlightenment. It's very hard to say, because so much of Hinduism has come from Buddhism.
People use the terminology of God or divine, such as this. Do you think that they could still have right view?
depends what one means, and it depends the level of the person. The ordinary person who's sort of pushing a plough around a field, it doesn't really matter very much. And if they have the idea of a God, it might help them somewhat. But people who really think, or who want to develop, they have to think in terms of what is this God. For instance, the Sankhya teaching can be with God or without God. You can have either. Yoga teaching, normally they have the idea of God. But when you think of God, you have to ask several questions. First of all, there are the gods of the sort of Brahma worlds, Brahma levels. Now, a lot of the gods that we hear about would seem to equate with that level. Because first of all, for a person to contact a God and be affected by a God, that God must be impermanent. Because we can't be affected by things that are not impermanent. The only thing that can affect us there is Nibbana, because it's part of ourselves anyway. It's not something separate. Now, if one likes to use the terminology of God, one can say, well, the main thing is I can really become God, because it's there in one. But it's a wrong way of thinking, really, isn't it? It brings up ideas of God being a person. And mostly people believe in a God because they're taught it by their parents and maybe preachers and other people. They're told you should love God. How can you love a God you've never seen and don't know anything about? There's a lot that's rather ridiculous in it when you look at it.
I've read it. Ajahn Buddhadasa saying that God is like Dhamma, equates the two. What is your opinion of this?
Well, it's just semantics. If you say God is like Dhamma, you're just giving it another name. It depends on what your fundamental idea of Dhamma is and your fundamental idea of God. But to put it like that's very misleading. Because people who've got an idea of God, they say, oh, in Buddhism they talk about their God is called Dhamma. And it isn't like that. It's not right. People who come to Buddhism, they should learn a bit of semantics. Semantics, if you don't know, means the meaning of words. And the meaning of words depends on the person who uses them. Often they can change their meaning in the person. And when a person uses the words, and another person picks up that word, listens to it and thinks it's of its meaning, really there's no way of telling whether that person's picked it up in exactly the same way as the person who put it out, or who spoke it. If somebody says something to you and they use words, words are symbols, and those symbols can have whatever meaning you give to them. As the person gives the wrong meaning, then they get the wrong end of the stick. And you're at cross purposes all the time. One should be cautious with words. It's very easy to get muddled with them.
sorry, I didn't understand though, but do you think that someone can use the word God and have right view? Is it possible, do you think?
Can someone use the word God and have right view?
I don't mean like Brahma God, this type of thing. I mean like Christians who talk about God.
I would say it's not right view, but it can lead to a right understanding in the end. If the person searches for that God and doesn't give up, goes on and on and on searching, and is never satisfied, he's almost bound to come in the end to realize that God is a figment of his own mind, and then he can turn to right view. The thing is, the ordinary meaning of God that people have is, it's almost, you can call it an impossible condition. It's a complete mixture. And people, they say, oh, it's due to God like that. God did it. They've never thought out what that means. They don't even think that they're defining God as being doing what they think he should do. I read some of the Muslims say that the shuttle blew up in space because God was doing it because of the situation in Iraq, which is pretty ridiculous because the situation in Iraq they're not at war yet even, and they sort of jump to conclusions like that, make up something which sounds to them good, and say something that's really stupid.